The fourth step never landed, because the blind man already knew who was standing behind the king. The recreation yard at Blackridge Correctional Facility had gone strangely quiet beneath the hard Arizona sun. Nearly 200 inmates stood along the painted lines and chain-link fences, watching Derek Maddox turn cruelty into entertainment. He called himself the king of Cell Block C, and nobody laughed unless he wanted them to. Nobody looked away unless he allowed it. At his feet was Elijah Carter, a 58-year-old black inmate, with a white cane lying several yards away on the concrete. Eli's dark glasses had slipped crooked across his face, revealing the pale scars that ran from his temple toward his eyes. Derek circled him slowly, making sure the entire yard could see. "You hear that silence, old man?" he asked. "That's respect." Eli remained on one knee, one hand resting lightly against the ground. His breathing was steady. His head was tilted, not toward Derek, but toward the sound around him. The fence humming in the wind, a loose shoelace brushing concrete, the distant rattle of a service card, and 3 uneven breaths behind Derek's left shoulder. The inmates thought Eli was searching for his cane. He was not. He was counting. Derek stepped closer and pressed the toe of his boot against Eli's shoulder, forcing him lower without striking him. A few men laughed, but the sound died quickly. Something about Eli's stillness made the moment feel wrong. He did not plead. He did not curse. He did not even reach for help. Derek mistook that calm for surrender. "Maybe they sent you to the wrong place," he said. "This isn't a hospital." Eli's fingers moved once against the concrete, tracing a thin crack in the yard. Noah Bennett watched from 10 feet away, his jaw tight, while 2 of Derek's men blocked his path. Officer Rachel Whitmore stood near the north gate with one hand close to her radio, but Sergeant Calvin Ross gave her a small shake of the head. "No intervention." "Not yet." Derek raised his boot again, preparing to humiliate Eli one more time. But before he could move, Eli spoke in a voice so quiet that everyone leaned closer to hear it. "3 men behind you," he said. Derek froze. Eli continued. "One has a homemade blade tucked inside his right sleeve. The man on your left is planning to turn on you before dinner." The yard changed. Heads turned. Cole Briggs, Derek's closest lieutenant, instinctively touched his sleeve. The smallest movement was enough. Derek looked back, confusion replacing amusement for the first time that morning. Eli had not seen any of them. He could not have. Yet every word was true. Then the prison alarm suddenly erupted, sharp and mechanical, cutting through the silence. Officers rushed into the yard and pulled Eli to his feet. Derek stepped back, relieved before he realized anyone had noticed. As Whitmore escorted Eli toward segregation, Noah called after him. Eli turned his scarred face toward the sound and said, "Don't trust the alarm. They didn't sound it to protect me." He paused as the steel door opened. They sounded it to protect Derek. 3 days earlier, Elijah Carter arrived at Blackridge Correctional Facility beneath a white noon sky that made the desert seem endless. The transport bus rolled through 2 steel gates and stopped inside a concrete intake yard surrounded by razor wire, guard towers, and walls stained by decades of heat. Eli stepped down slowly, one hand holding his white cane, the other carrying a clear plastic bag with everything the state allowed him to own. A younger officer reached for his elbow, but Eli moved away before the man touched him. "I can walk," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, yet it carried enough certainty to end the discussion. The officer shrugged and pointed toward intake, forgetting for a moment that directions meant little to a man who could not see them. Eli listened instead. The intake door stood 32 feet ahead. He knew because the air changed whenever it opened, releasing a cool mechanical breath into the hot yard. He heard 6 men waiting near the wall, 2 officers behind a desk, a ceiling fan with a loose bearing, and keys hanging from the right hip of the guard nearest the doorway. To everyone else, these were random sounds. To Eli, they were landmarks. By the time his fingerprints were taken, his photograph recorded, and his prison clothes issued, he had already memorized the route from intake to cell block C, 7 seconds from the first security door to the stairs, 12 steps from the water fountain to the camera blind spot beneath the west balcony. a ventilation fan that clicked every fourth rotation. Two officers wearing boots with different soles, one soft rubber, one hard leather. Eli counted without moving his lips. At 58 years old, he had learned that people revealed more through rhythm than words. Fear hurried. Pride dragged its heels. A lie often arrived half a second late. Officer Rachel Whitmore escorted him through the block, while Sergeant Calvin Ross followed several feet behind. Whitmore explained the meal schedule, recreation times, and emergency rules in a direct professional tone. Ross said nothing, but Eli noticed that other officers lowered their voices when he passed. He also noticed something else. Near the laundry corridor, a locked service door opened at exactly 2:13 in the afternoon, even though no work crew had been scheduled. Someone stepped out, paused, and handed Ross a small object wrapped in paper. The exchange took less than 3 seconds. Eli continued walking as though he had heard nothing. His assigned cell was on the lower tier with Noah Bennett, a 23-year-old inmate whose nervous breathing gave away his age before he introduced himself. Noah quickly moved a chair, cleared the floor, and began describing the room. Eli thanked him, then crossed the cell without using the cane. He touched the bunk, sink, desk, wall, and door in a precise sequence. Noah watched as Eli measured the space by pace and sound. "You do that everywhere?" he asked. Eli placed his few belongings in perfect order. "Only in places where people expect me to get lost." That night, long after the lights dimmed, Eli lay awake listening to Blackridge breathe. Pipes knocked behind the walls. Doors opened out of sequence. Footsteps stopped where no officer should have been standing. Then, at 2:13 in the morning, the same service door opened again. Eli turned his face toward the sound and began counting. By breakfast, Cell Block C had already learned that Elijah Carter was different, but Derek Maddox had not yet decided whether that difference amused him or offended him. Derek entered the cafeteria, surrounded by 4 men who moved when he moved and laughed when he laughed. He was 41 years old, broad through the shoulders, pale-skinned, and covered in tattoos that looked less like decoration and more like warnings. The inmates called him the King because he controlled every table, every favor, and every small privilege that made prison life easier to survive. He decided who received protection, who lost their place in line, and who became the day's entertainment. The officers knew what he did. Most ignored it. Sergeant Calvin Ross did more than ignore it. He allowed Derek just enough power to keep the block afraid, and just enough freedom to make that fear useful. Derek never humiliated anyone in private. Private fear had no value to him. He needed witnesses. He needed a room to fall silent when he entered and laughter to rise when he lifted one hand. Without an audience, he was only another inmate serving time. With one, he became the man who controlled the air. Eli entered the cafeteria beside Noah Bennett, tapping his cane lightly across the floor. Conversations softened as heads turned. Derek heard the sound before he saw the man. A measured tap followed by one calm step, then another. He smiled. A blind newcomer, older, quiet, and black, walking into his block without knowing who ruled it. To Derek, it felt like an invitation. He moved into Eli's path and placed one hand on the empty seat beside him. "That table is taken," he said. Noah stopped immediately. Eli did not. His cane touched the leg of the bench, changed direction, and guided him toward another table without a word. A few inmates glanced at Derek, waiting for his reaction. The lack of fear bothered him more than open defiance would have. "I was talking to you," Derek called. "Ili Bosit." He turned his face toward Derek's voice with perfect accuracy. "I heard you," he said. Then he continued walking. The room went still. Derek's men looked at him, uncertain whether they were supposed to laugh. That uncertainty lasted less than a second, but Derek felt it. Power could survive hatred. It could survive resistance. What it could not survive was hesitation. He followed Eli and took the tray from the table before the older man could sit. "New arrivals pay a tax," Derek said. Eli stood beside the bench, his expression unchanged. "Then you should ask the state to put on the paperwork." A few men lowered their heads to hide smiles. Derek leaned closer, expecting Eli Torstai retreat. Instead, Eli tilted his head slightly, listening to the change in Derek's breathing. "You think this is funny?" Derek asked. "No, ili deeply. I think you need everyone else to think it is." The words landed harder than an insult because they were true. Derek looked around and saw every face waiting for him to prove otherwise. In that moment, Eli became more than a vulnerable newcomer. He became a threat to the performance Derek had spent years building. Derek returned the tray, but only after sliding it several inches away. "We will see how long that calm lasts," he said. Eli found the tray without searching. Calm usually lasts longer than pride. As Eli sat down, Derek walked away with his men, but the cafeteria did not return to normal. Something had shifted. For the first time in years, the king had spoken and someone had answered without fear. Derek could feel the eyes following him, and he understood that the blind man would have to be broken in public. That afternoon, Noah discovered the first reason Elijah Carter refused to fight. The laundry room was nearly empty except for the low hum of industrial dryers and the sharp scent of detergent. Noah had gone there to collect his assigned uniforms when two inmates stepped into the doorway and asked for his commissary account number. Their voices were quiet, but their purpose was clear. Noah tried to laugh it off. The sound came out thin. Eli was folding a shirt at the far table, his white cane resting against the wall. He did not turn around. "There are 3 of you," he said. The men looked at one another. Only 2 were visible. A third stood behind a row of machines, waiting out of sight. Eli continued folding the shirt with slow, exact movements. "The man behind the second dryer is wearing county-issued shoes that are one size too large. His right heel keeps slipping." The hidden inmate stepped out, more startled than angry. Noah stared at Eli. The dryers were loud enough to bury ordinary conversation, yet Eli had separated every footstep, every breath, and every shift of fabric. One of the men moved closer to Noah and told him the price would double if he caused trouble. Eli placed the folded shirt on the table. "Noah does not owe you anything," he said. There was no threat in his voice. That made the room feel more uncertain. The men waited for him to stand, but he remained where he was. He simply described them. One man favored his left knee. Another kept touching the pocket where he had hidden something prohibited. The third was nervous enough to breathe through his mouth. Each detail stripped away a little of their confidence. They left without another word. Noah waited until their footsteps disappeared down the corridor. "You could have stopped them whenever you wanted," he said. Eli reached for his cane. Stopping someone is not the same as changing what brought them through the door. Noah followed him back toward the cell block, still trying to understand. "Were you a police officer?" Eli did not answer. "Military?" Noah asked. Eli's cane tapped once against the base of the wall. For the first time, his rhythm changed. "A long time ago, I gave an order in a place where darkness covered everything," he said. The information was wrong. I believed it anyway. His voice remained controlled, but the silence around each sentence carried weight. He explained that a rescue team had entered a building expecting civilians and found a trap instead. Eli survived the explosion that followed, but the blast took his sight. 2 men under his command never came home. Their names still arrived in his dreams before their faces did. Afterward, people praised Eli for saving the rest of the team. He never accepted the praise. "They call me disciplined," he said. "What I remember is being certain when I should have been careful." Noah lowered his voice. "So you promised never to fight again?" Eli paused near the entrance to cell block C. "I promised never to confuse ability with permission." Across the common area, Derek Maddox watched them from his usual table. He could not hear the conversation, but he saw Noah looking at Eli with something close to respect. That was enough. Derek leaned toward Cole Briggs and whispered an instruction. A few seconds later, Cole rose and walked toward the upper tier. Eli heard the chair scrape, the change in Derek's breathing, and the soft leather steps moving away. "What is it?" Noah asked. Eli turned his face toward the staircase. "He is not planning to test me next," he said. "He is planning to test you." The warning came too late for Noah to avoid the trap, but not too late for Elijah to understand who had built it. Less than an hour after Cole Briggs left the common area, Noah was called to the laundry corridor by an officer who claimed there was a problem with his work assignment. The corridor was narrow, windowless, and louder than usual because both industrial dryers were running at once. When Noah stepped inside, the officer disappeared. The door closed behind him. 3 inmates were waiting near the folding tables. None of them spoke. They did not need to. By the time Eli heard the disturbance from the lower tier, Sergeant Calvin Ross was already moving toward the corridor with deliberate, unhurried steps. That told Eli everything. Ross was not responding to trouble. He was arriving for it. Eli crossed the common area with his cane tapping steadily against the floor. Officer Rachel Whitmore intercepted him near the security gate. "You cannot go back there," she said. "Then you should," Eli replied. Whitmore hesitated. Ross had already entered the laundry corridor and locked the door from inside. Through the machinery, Eli heard Noah's voice, strained but controlled. Then he heard Ross say something too low for Whitmore to catch. "Put it in his locker." A small metal object changed hands. Eli turned his face toward Whitmore. "They are planting a weapon." Her breathing stopped for half a second. "How could you know that?" "Because the person holding it keeps tapping it against a belt buckle." Whitmore reached for her radio, but Eli raised one hand. "Do not call Ross." She slowly lowered it. For months, Whitmore had suspected that reports from Cell Block C were being altered. Complaints vanished. Camera footage failed at convenient times. Confiscated items appeared in places that justified transfers, punishments, and closed investigations. Every trail ended at Ross, but suspicion was not proof. Now a blind inmate had described an event occurring behind a locked steel door with impossible accuracy. Whitmore used her override key. The corridor opened to silence. Noah stood beside a laundry cart, pale and confused. Cole Briggs was near the lockers. Ross faced Whitmore with a smile that arrived too quickly. "Routine search," he said. Whitmore looked at the open locker assigned to Noah. A prohibited object rested beneath a folded towel. "Interesting timing," she said. Ross shrugged. "You know how these people are." Eli's expression changed so slightly that only Noah noticed. Ross had not simply accused him. He had used the same casual contempt Derek used whenever he needed the room to agree with him. Whitmore ordered everyone out and sealed the area for review. Ross protested, but she did not move. Eli listened to the tension between them and understood that Blackridge had 2 systems of power. Derek controlled the inmates through humiliation. Ross controlled the official record through paperwork, access, and silence. One performed in the open. The other worked behind locked doors. Later, back in the cell, Noah asked why Ross would target him. Eli sat on the edge of the lower bunk, his cane resting across his knees. "Because you are close to me," he said, "and because he thinks hurting you will make me careless." Noah looked toward the corridor. "Derek is the one everyone fears." Eli shook his head. "Derek is loud. Loud men make useful distractions." At exactly 2:13 that afternoon, the service door opened again. This time Eli heard Ross enter, followed by Derek and one additional set of footsteps. The men spoke in whispers, but the ventilation duct carried fragments into the cell. A delivery, a missing report, a scheduled camera failure. Then Derek asked, the question Eli had been waiting for. "What do you want me to do about the blind man?" Ross answered without hesitation. "Make him lose control in front of witnesses." The service door closed. Noah stared at Eli, waiting for fear or anger. Eli showed neither. He placed one hand against the wall and traced the faint vibration left by the footsteps moving away. "Derek is not the king," he said quietly. "He is the gatekeeper," and Ross just opened the gate. By the next morning, Derek Maddox had changed his strategy. He no longer tried to embarrass Elijah directly. Instead, he made Noah's world smaller. Noah's breakfast tray disappeared before he reached the table. His work assignment was changed without notice. His name was removed from the recreation list, then added back with a disciplinary warning attached. Each move looked minor on paper. Together, they formed a cage. Eli recognized the pattern because Ross had designed it to look like procedure. Derek supplied the pressure. Ross supplied the record. By noon, Noah was summoned to the property room and told that another prohibited item had been found among his belongings. He denied it, but the officer on duty would not meet his eyes. Eli stood 20 feet away, listening to the pages turn on a clipboard. One page had been inserted recently. The paper was stiffer than the rest. The signature at the bottom had been written with a pen that scratched differently across the surface. "Do not argue," Eli told Noah. "Remember every word they use." Noah looked at him in disbelief. "They are trying to move me to the North Wing." Everyone in Blackridge knew what that meant. The North Wing held inmates with longer sentences, fewer privileges, and no patience for newcomers. Ilias Yov Taitenet. That is why you must stay calm. Noah's voice dropped. "You keep telling me to stay calm while they close every door." Eli turned toward him. "Calm is not surrender. It is how you notice which door they forgot to lock." That afternoon, Officer Whitmore found Eli near the chapel corridor. She spoke quietly. The camera outside the property room lost 12 minutes of footage. "Ili nodded. Ross was there." "I know." Her voice carried frustration. "Knowing is not proving." Eli tilted his head toward the ceiling vent. The service hallway shares ventilation with the laundry room and the lower cells. Conversations travel farther than people think. Whitmore understood. "You heard them. Enough to know Derek has been ordered to make me act in public. Then do not give them what they want." Eli was silent for several seconds. "They have already decided what they want. The only choice left is who controls the moment." Before Whitmore could answer, the recreation bell sounded. The yard opened under the hard white sun, and inmates moved through the gate in slow groups. Noah was escorted separately, his hands visible, his expression tense. Derek waited near the basketball court with Cole Briggs and 3 others. He had arranged the space carefully. The benches were full. The upper windows were crowded. Even Ross had positioned himself where he could watch without appearing involved. Derek smiled when Eli entered. "There he is," he called. "The man who hears everything except good advice." Laughter rose, uncertain and forced. Eli stopped near the painted boundary line. His cane tapped once, then twice. He heard Noah standing 15 feet to his right. He heard Whitmore near the north gate. He heard Ross beside the control panel. He heard Cole's sleeve brush against something rigid. Derek began describing Noah as a liar and a thief, telling the yard that the younger man would be transferred before sunset. Noah tried to speak, but Derek cut him off. "Your friend can save you," he said. "All he has to do is admit he is not helpless." Eli's face remained calm. Inside, the old memory returned. A dark building, bad information, men trusting his certainty. He had spent years believing restraint meant never stepping forward again. Now he understood the difference. Refusing to act could become its own kind of failure. Eli folded his cane and handed it to Noah. "Hold this," he said. Noah's breathing changed. "What are you doing?" Eli turned toward Derek's voice. Choosing carefully. Derek stepped closer, pleased that the audience had gone silent. What he did not realize was that Eli was no longer listening only to him. He was measuring the yard, locating every witness, every exit, every hidden threat, and the exact position of the man who believed he controlled the cameras. Then Eli heard Ross whisper into his radio, "Begin when ready." Eli's expression hardened. "Now I know where everyone is," he said. Derek smiled because he believed the silence belonged to him. He stepped closer to Elijah, slow enough for every inmate in the yard to notice, and spoke in the exaggerated tone he used whenever he wanted the crowd to follow his lead. "You hear that, old man? Nobody is coming to help you." Elijah stood with his hands open at his sides. Noah held the folded cane behind him. Officer Whitmore remained near the north gate, watching Sergeant Calvin Ross instead of Derek. That was exactly what Elijah had hoped for. Derek moved around him in a wide circle, trying to make the moment feel like a spectacle. Elijah listened to the scrape of his shoes, the change in distance, the tension in Cole Briggs's breathing, and the faint click of Ross touching the control panel. "You built your whole reputation on people looking at you," Elijah said. Derek stopped. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you are afraid of what happens when they stop." The yard stayed quiet. Derek looked toward the benches and saw no laughter waiting for him. For the first time, The inmates were not watching Elijah as a victim. They were watching Derek as a man who needed permission from the room. His voice sharpened. "You think you know me?" Elijah turned his face toward him with unnerving accuracy. "I know you pause before every threat to see whether Ross approves." A movement passed through the crowd. Whitmore looked directly at Ross. Derek's confidence faltered. Ross lifted his radio and ordered the officers to clear the yard, but Whitmore did not move. "On what grounds?" she asked. Ross ignored her. Elijah continued before he could regain control. "Cole has been carrying something in his right sleeve since morning. He does not plan to use it on me." Cole's breathing stopped. Derek turned toward him. "What is he talking about?" Cole said nothing. Elijah heard the tiny shift of weight. As the man stepped away from Derek, he was promised protection. Elijah said, "Your position in exchange for his silence." Derek faced Ross now. "You told me he was with us." Ross spoke into his radio again, louder this time, but no alarm sounded. Whitmore had already disabled his access from the secondary panel. Derek finally understood. The audience had changed sides without taking a single step. Elijah moved only enough to place himself between Noah and the center of the yard. He did not raise his hands. He did not need to. Derek's authority had depended on the belief that everyone around him was too afraid to speak. Now that belief was breaking in real time. "Tell them," Elijah said. Derek's voice dropped. "Tell them what? Who gives the orders? Who changes the reports? Who decides which cameras fail?" Ross shouted for him to stop, but the command came too late. Derek looked from Ross to Cole, then toward the officers who were no longer following Ross's instructions. The truth became safer than loyalty. "Ross runs it," Derek said. The words were barely audible, but the yard heard them. The deliveries, the transfers, the missing footage. All of it. Ross reached for the panel, and Whitmore stepped in front of him. "Do not touch it." Derek kept speaking, each sentence pulling another brick from the kingdom he had built. He admitted that Noah had been framed. He admitted that the service door opened for unauthorized exchanges. He admitted that every public humiliation had served a private system. Elijah listened until Derek had nothing left to hide behind. Then he said, "A king who needs permission is not a king." At that moment, the prison alarm finally erupted, the same sharp mechanical sound that would later echo across the yard. Officers rushed through the gates. Ross pointed at Elijah and shouted that he had caused a disturbance. Whitmore answered before anyone else could. "No." He exposed one. As Elijah was escorted away, Derek stood alone in the center of the yard. No one laughed. No one lowered their eyes. The throne had disappeared, and all that remained was a frightened man standing where a king used to be. Elijah had taken only 6 steps toward segregation when a second set of boots entered the yard, faster, heavier, and moving with practiced coordination. The tactical response team came through the east gate in dark uniforms, helmets secured, voices controlled. At the center was Captain Daniel Mercer, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s whose calm presence quieted the officers around him. Sergeant Calvin Ross immediately pointed toward Elijah. "That inmate organized the disturbance," he said. "He manipulated the block and threatened security." Mercer did not answer. His attention had shifted to Elijah's posture, the angle of his head, and the way he stood without searching for the source of every voice. Whitmore stepped forward. "Captain, Ross is lying. I have witnesses and recorded statements." Ross raised his voice. "She has lost control of the yard." Mercer still did not look at him. Instead, he addressed Elijah. "Hands where I can see them." Elijah lifted both hands slowly. Then a radio crackled near the gate, followed by 3 officers speaking at once. The overlapping noise made one of the younger tactical officers turn toward the wrong corridor. Elijah reacted before anyone else. "North Passage, second doorway," he said. "The echo is wrong. Someone left it unsecured." Mercer's head snapped toward him. The officer checked. The door was open. A strange stillness moved through the team. Mercer took 1 step closer. "Who taught you to read in closed space like that?" Elijah did not answer. Ross interrupted. "He is pretending. He has been causing problems since arrival." Mercer ignored him. "What is your full name?" "Elijah James Carter." The color left Mercer's face. He removed his helmet slowly, as though the yard had suddenly become a place requiring respect. Master Sergeant Carter, Noah, Derek Whitmore, and every nearby officer looked toward Elijah. Eli's expression did not change. That was a long time ago. Mercer let out a breath that sounded almost like disbelief. You trained my unit at Fort Bragg. The tactical officers exchanged glances. Ross gave a short, dismissive laugh. He's a blind inmate. Mercer turned toward him for the first time. He was also one of the finest instructors the United States Army Special Forces ever produced. The words carried across the yard. Mercer explained that Elijah had specialized in low-visibility movement, sound-based navigation, and decision-making under sensory loss. He had trained Green Berets, Army Rangers, and members of Navy Special Operations units. His methods were so demanding that even experienced operators dreaded hearing his name on a training schedule. Not because he humiliated them, Mercer said, but because he exposed every careless habit they believed skill had hidden. He could identify hesitation from breathing, poor balance from a single footstep, and fear before the person feeling it understood what was happening. He once put my entire team in a blacked-out training building. Mercer continued. We thought we had the advantage. He found every one of us without raising his voice. Derek stared at Elijah as if seeing him for the first time. The man he had treated as helpless had spent years teaching elite soldiers how to function when sight disappeared. Ross tried to regain control. Military history does not change what happened here. Whitmore held up her recorder. No, but Derek's confession does. She played the portion naming Ross, the altered reports, the stage transfers, and the camera failures. Ross reached for his radio, but Mercer raised one hand. Two officers stepped beside him. Sergeant Ross, Mercer said, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. The yard fell silent again, but this silence did not belong to Derek or Ross. Mercer faced Elijah. Why did you not tell anyone who you were? Elijah lowered his hands. Because a title does not make a man innocent. Mercer studied him, and being blind does not make him powerless. Elijah turned toward Noah's breathing across the yard. No, he said, but power is most dangerous when people mistake it for permission. By sunset, Cell Block C no longer moved according to Derek Maddox's rules. Sergeant Calvin Ross had been escorted from the yard. Officer Rachel Whitmore had secured the recorder, and every report connected to Noah Bennett's transfer was placed under review. The change was not loud. No one celebrated. No one needed to. It showed in smaller things. Men sat where they wanted at dinner. Conversations continued when Derek entered the room. Cole Briggs asked to speak with investigators without first looking for permission. A kingdom built on fear had vanished the moment people realized the king had never ruled alone. Noah's disciplinary charges were suspended before evening count. When he returned to the cell, he placed Elijah's folded cane carefully beside the lower bunk. You knew they would turn on each other, he said. Elijah sat with his hands resting on his knees. I knew fear makes loyalty temporary. Noah lowered his voice. You could have told me who you were. A uniform from the past would not have changed what they were doing in the present. It would have changed how Derek treated you. Elijah turned toward him. Then he would have learned nothing. Across the block, Derek sat alone at the table that had once been surrounded by followers. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then he stood and walked toward Elijah's cell. Noah tensed, but Elijah remained still. Derek stopped outside the bars, his confidence gone, his voice quieter than anyone had heard it before. Why did you not destroy me when you had the chance? Elijah considered the question. Because you spent years teaching everyone that power means making another person feel small. He tilted his head toward Derek. I was not going to help you prove it. Derek looked down at the floor. For once, no audience watched him. I thought if they feared me, they could not use me. Elijah's expression softened, but only slightly. Fear does not protect a man. It rents him a room inside a prison he carries everywhere. Derek left without answering. The next morning, Captain Daniel Mercer returned with Whitmore and a sealed envelope. He explained that federal investigators had taken over the case against Ross. The service door records, altered reports, and unauthorized transfers reached beyond Blackridge. Whitmore had also reviewed Elijah's conviction. There are problems, she said. Missing evidence. A witness statement entered 3 days after the trial, and one security contractor appears in both your case and this prison's records. Elijah's breathing changed for the first time. Mercer placed the envelope on the table. The company is called Meridian Strategic Systems. The name moved through Elijah like an old sound returning from a great distance. 12 years earlier, Meridian had supplied the intelligence behind the failed mission that took his site and claimed the lives of 2 men under his command. The official inquiry had called it incomplete information. Elijah had always believed it was something worse. Who signed the Blackridge contract? He asked. Whitmore slid a document from the envelope. A man named Warren Vale. Elijah went completely still. Noah watched him with growing concern. You know him? Elijah reached for the paper, though he could not read it. His fingers rested over the signature as if memory could travel through ink. He was in the command room the night everything went wrong. Mercer leaned closer. Then your conviction may not have been an accident. Before Elijah could respond, footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor. Slow, measured, familiar. The block was under restricted access, yet no alarm sounded. The footsteps stopped outside the cell. A man spoke from beyond the bars. You still count every step, Elijah. Noah looked toward the stranger. Mercer reached for his radio. Elijah raised one hand, stopping him. His face remained calm, but the years between the prison cell and that dark building seemed to collapse at once. I have been waiting 12 years to hear your voice again,